There's a moment where everything changes, when the boundaries between your thoughts and the world dissolve, when you realize the voice in your head isn't the only voice. And what most people don't understand is that this moment, this experience, has been quietly reshaping neuroscience. We're not talking about mysticism or fairy tales. We're talking about psilocybin, a compound that's forcing the scientific community to reconsider what consciousness actually is. Because for decades we told a story about the brain, a story about rigid neural pathways, about locked and loaded consciousness, about chemistry that doesn't change. But psilocybin is rewriting that story, and it's doing something we didn't expect. It's showing us that the brain we thought was fixed might actually be profoundly flexible, profoundly conscious, profoundly aware of itself in ways we're only beginning to understand. Let's talk about what actually happens when psilocybin enters your system. On a biochemical level, it mimics serotonin, a neurotransmitter that regulates mood, perception, and sense of self. But here's where it gets strange. It doesn't just plug into the same receptors. It activates them in patterns that don't normally occur. Researchers at Johns Hopkins and Imperial College have found something fascinating. When people are on psilocybin, the default mode network of the brain starts to break down. Now, the default mode network is essentially the part of your brain that maintains your sense of self, that keeps the boundaries between you and everything else sharp and defined. It's the voice saying, I am separate from that. That's not me. And for most of our lives, this network hums along quietly, keeping our identity intact. It's like a constant internal narrator, always reinforcing the story of who you are. It filters incoming information through the lens of your ego. It decides what matters to you. It protects you from threats, both real and imagined. But psilocybin quiets it. It literally turns down the volume on the part of your brain that insists on your separateness. And when that happens, something extraordinary occurs. People begin to perceive themselves as part of something larger. Not in a metaphorical sense, though there is that, but in a literal, felt sense of interconnection. They describe it as the dissolution of boundaries, as ego death, though that phrase doesn't quite capture it, because the ego doesn't die. It transforms, it stretches, it remembers that it was never as separate as it believed. The boundaries you've always felt, the edges between self and other, they reveal themselves as constructions. Necessary constructions perhaps, but constructions nonetheless. This is neuroscience. This is what happens inside the brain when a simple molecule finds its way to your neural receptors. But the implications are massive, because if our sense of self is something that can be shifted, something that can expand and contract, then it's not a fixed truth. It's a construction. And if it's a construction, then what else might we be constructing without realizing it? Your anxiety, your certainty, your limitations, your unwillingness to change. What if these things too are just the default mode network insisting on what's familiar, insisting on safety through repetition? And psilocybin, by briefly quieting that insistence, allows the brain to imagine something different. Researchers have found that after a single psilocybin session, the brain shows increased neuroplasticity. This means the connections between neurons become more malleable, more willing to form new patterns. And this isn't just a temporary effect. Brain imaging studies show that months after a session, the neural architecture has actually reorganized itself. New pathways have formed. Old assumptions have been questioned. It's like the brain has been reminded that it can change, and so it does. The fascinating part is that this isn't passive. The brain doesn't just revert once the drug wears off. Instead, it retains a kind of memory of expansion. The experience teaches your neural networks that they're capable of different configurations. And even after sobriety returns, the brain maintains some of that flexibility. This is why people often report lasting changes in perspective, in habits, in how they relate to themselves in the world, long after a single experience. But there's something even stranger happening. Psilocybin doesn't just affect the default mode network, it increases entropy in the brain. Entropy is a measure of disorder, of randomness. Higher entropy means more possibilities, more flexibility, more potential for novel connections. During ordinary consciousness, our brains maintain a certain level of order. It's efficient. It's useful for survival. But it's also rigid. We see what we expect to see. We think what we've always thought. We become trapped in our own neural patterns. Psilocybin increases entropy, which sounds chaotic. But it's actually the opposite of chaos. It's possibility. It's the moment when your brain forgets what it's supposed to see and begins to actually see. And when that happens, everything changes. Not just chemically, but perceptually, spiritually, cognitively. Take anxiety and depression. For years, the standard treatment has been SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. They increase serotonin levels by preventing the brain from reabsorbing it, and they work for some people, but they also numb. They don't solve the underlying issue of why the brain is stuck in these patterns in the first place, but psilocybin works differently. It doesn't artificially boost serotonin. It uses existing serotonin more flexibly. It allows the brain to think thoughts it's never thought before, to make connections it's never made before, to question beliefs that have calcified into identity. This is crucial because many people who suffer from chronic depression or anxiety aren't suffering from too little serotonin. They're suffering from too much rigidity, too much repetition of the same neural patterns. The brain gets stuck in a loop, firing the same neurons in the same sequences, creating the same feelings over and over. It becomes a habit at the neurological level, and psilocybin breaks that habit. It forces the brain into new patterns by increasing entropy, by disrupting the predictability. And in studies, people report not just symptom relief, but a genuine shift in perspective. An understanding that the stories they've been telling themselves about themselves aren't necessarily true. A clinical depression trial run by Johns Hopkins found that 70% of participants showed significant improvement in depressive symptoms. But more striking than the numbers is the quality of improvement. People report what they call an existential shift, a sense that life is meaningful again. Not because the chemicals shifted, but because their consciousness did, because they were able to step outside their own minds and see them clearly for the first time. This is what awareness really is. It's not just consciousness, it's the capacity to see your own consciousness, to notice the patterns, to question them, to ask, is this thought actually true? Or is it just the default mode network insisting on what's familiar? And most of us, most of the time, never ask that question. We live inside our patterns, completely unaware that they're patterns at all. We think our anxiety is real. We think our depression is who we are. We think our limitations are facts about the world. But psilocybin creates a temporary opening, a moment where you can see the architecture of your own mind. And once you've seen it, you can never unsee it. The brain remembers. Even months after the experience ends, even after the drug has completely left your system, the neural pathways that were activated during the experience remain more available. They stay more plastic. It's like your brain has developed a new muscle memory, a remembered capacity for different kinds of thinking, for different kinds of seeing. But here's what's important. The drug doesn't create the awareness. It reveals what was already there. It's not adding something foreign to the brain. It's reorganizing what the brain already contains. Your consciousness is always larger than your ego believes. Your mind is always more flexible than your habits suggest. Psilocybin simply shows you that. It's like the difference between reading about the ocean and feeling the ocean. The information is the same. The understanding is completely different. Neuroscientists have started to map what they call the connectomy, the complete map of neural connections in the brain. And what they're discovering is that the brain is far more interconnected than we thought. Not just locally connected, but globally connected, which means every part of your brain in some way can influence every other part. And under psilocybin, this global connectivity increases dramatically. The brain starts talking to itself in ways it normally doesn't. Distant regions suddenly influence each other. And this is when people report the most profound experiences. Not when one part of the brain dominates, but when the whole thing starts working together. When the default mode network stops insisting on your identity and everything else gets a chance to speak. This is the hidden key to awareness. It's not enlightenment. It's not mystical knowledge downloaded from some cosmic source. It's the recognition that your mind is constantly constructing reality, and that construction is not fixed, that you have far more capacity for understanding, compassion, and growth than your daily consciousness allows you to access. And that capacity isn't waiting for psilocybin. Psilocybin is just a temporary door. But once you've walked through it, you know the door exists. You know that your consciousness is not your mind, that your mind is not your brain, that your brain is not separate from the rest of the world. Everything is connected, not metaphorically, but neurologically, psychologically, fundamentally. The most interesting thing researchers have discovered is that people don't always need psilocybin to maintain these insights. The brain changes they experience during the trip. The neural flexibility, the increased connectivity, they persist. And once people understand that their patterns are not their destiny, they begin to change those patterns themselves. They meditate, they journal, they seek new experiences, they become conscious of their own consciousness, they become aware of their own awareness. This is the ripple effect that psilocybin creates. It's not that the drug is addictive in the classical sense, but the expansion it provides is. Once you've felt your mind open, closing it again becomes difficult. You start to notice the rigidity in everyday consciousness. You start to question more. You start to wonder, and in that wondering, consciousness itself evolves. The brain is a system designed by evolution to keep you alive. But alive is not the same as aware. Alive means running patterns efficiently. Alive means not questioning assumptions. Alive means staying within the boundaries you've been given. But aware means something different. It means noticing those boundaries. It means understanding that they're not absolute. It means recognizing that the separateness you've always felt might be an illusion created by a specific configuration of your neural networks. And when you realize that the boundaries of your identity are not as solid as they feel, something shifts permanently. You stop fighting so hard to maintain a self that might be more fluid than you thought. You start allowing yourself to change, to grow, to become different. This is the neuroscience of transformation. Not through chemical alteration, but through the revelation that your consciousness was always capable of more. Psilocybin doesn't give you a new brain. It reminds you of the brain you already have. It shows you the potential that's always been there, waiting behind the default mode network, waiting behind the stories you've been telling yourself about who you are and what's possible. And once you've seen that potential, you can spend the rest of your life developing it, slowly, carefully, without a drug, just with the knowledge that your mind is not your master. It's your instrument. And like any instrument, it can learn new songs. It can play melodies it's never played before. It can express things it's never expressed. Because the capacity was always there. Hidden. Waiting. Conscious. Aware. Calling to you through the quiet moments of your life. Through the questions you ask yourself in the dark. Through the dreams you can't quite remember but that linger like echoes of something larger. That echo, that sense that there's more. That's your consciousness trying to show you itself. That's the hidden key. And once you understand that, awareness itself becomes the greatest medicine.